mean, I was with a grieving mother who just lost her son of 40 years old. She's masked, I'm masked, we're 6 feet apart, and she's crying through her mask. I'm crying through my mask, and I can't I can't touch her or hug her. And then we go right into the conversation of funeral homes and next steps. And I prayed with her from afar, but there's definitely an element missing.
Welcome in, everyone, to the Louisiana NOW podcast. I'm your host, Todd Rossnagel, Director of Communications for the Louisiana Conference of the United Methodist Church. It is great to have everyone along with us. That voice you heard off the top was that of Reverend Tiffanie Lyon, Associate Pastor at First UMC in Slidell. She is also a chaplain at Ochsner Medical Center in New Orleans. She is one of our 2 guests today on the Louisiana NOW podcast. Our second guest is Dr. Chip Riggins, who serves as Regional Medical Director for the 7-parish area known as the Bayou Region, and also a member of Houma United Methodist Church. Both Chip and Tiffanie are on the front lines, if you will, battling the coronavirus, and in Tiffany's case, comforting patients and family members, and in Chip's case, monitoring the health system of Louisiana, from hospice facilities to EMS response to hospitals and social services. We wanted to get a sense of not only what they are seeing, but where they see God in the midst of everything right now on the ground in Louisiana. We begin with Reverend Lyon and her role as a chaplain. She begins with more on what a chaplain normally does and what a chaplain is doing now in the face of the incredibly infectious disease known as COVID-19.
We go door to door to the patients and we visit with the patients. We are a non-anxious presence, and we're there to let the patient lead the conversation, and we're a listening ear. We don't try to solve their problems, to fix them, to preach. We're just an ear for them. And we often hold hands, and we'll often pray together if that's what they would like. We certainly do that. And many times we circle up around the room with family members and pray. So there's a lot of personal contact and touching and conversation and listening going on. So that's what we do during the day until we get a call for a code blue that we might hear over the announcement where someone's going into a cardiac arrest. We'll rush up there. We're called to deaths to be bedside with the family during deaths. And we're also called to what they call withdrawal of care, where a family has decided that their loved one should go on comfort measures. So we're with them during that time of those difficult decisions. So a typical day is very different from day to day, and it can be both simple in the type of ministry as well as very dramatic. So that was before the COVID came along. And now our new normal is where we have to be masked up, gowned when we go on the floors, and we cannot go in any patients' rooms that are COVID positive ICUs. And in our hospital, that is about 5 floors of rooms that we cannot go into. So we lose that personal touch. We lose visiting with the families because the family restriction or visitor restriction is near 0. So we lose all of that, and we tend to be responsive more than proactive. And unfortunately, that responsiveness is to deaths and withdrawal of care. And so it's mostly dramatic, and sadly, it's practically the same every day, unlike the pre-COVID time periods. And we tend to pray through the glass of the ICU windows, and we also become tech support on some of the communication tools we're using. So that's kind of the new version of a hospital chaplain in these days.
Tiffanie, there is a lot being made of how technology is really bringing people together when we can't be together. But I can only imagine that that is just not ideal for your setting. Not ideal for you to provide pastoral care, and certainly not ideal for the patients to be able to communicate with families. That's got to be troubling.
Yeah, it's very difficult and troubling because we are using the telephone, we're using tablets for Skype, we're using oftentimes the patient and family's phones for FaceTime or video chat. So we've become tech support. We're not allowed to go into the rooms. So the nurses call us and say, hey, I have a family that wants to see and talk to their loved ones. So we run up with the tablet and we get them engaged and get it all working or not. And the loved one, I pray with the family member oftentimes through Skype, seeing them. And then I introduce them to the nurse face to face. The nurse gets all geared up because we can't go in the rooms. And the nurse takes the device into the room for the loved one to talk to their family member who is a patient. And I pretty much pray through the glass. And we've also have a lot of tele-chaplaincy by phone. And there's been some really heart-wrenching conversations through the phone where you just feel so powerless and you can't have that power of touch and to see into someone's eyes. So the technology has been a blessing in a lot of ways, but also just disheartening.
Tiffanie, you mentioned the power of touch, specifically human touch, and that it's lost, it's missing right now. I am sure in its moment of absence that you are truly understanding the power of human touch.
Amen. I've always felt that the power of touch is so strong, whether they're Christians or whatever their belief, just humanity from human to human, and that element is gone. I mean, I was with a grieving mother who just lost her son of 40 years old. She's masked, I'm masked, we're 6 feet apart, and she's crying through her mask. I'm crying through my mask, and I can't touch her or hug her. And then we go right into the conversation of funeral homes and next steps. And I prayed with her from afar, but there's definitely an element missing when you don't have that touch.
Tiffanie, you more than anyone are likely getting this question a lot. And the question being, why is this happening? How are you answering that question? You might not even have an answer for that question, but how are you responding to that query from not only patients but also family members?
And believe it or not, you would think I would get that question a lot, but actually since COVID, I haven't as much. And the reason why I think now is because people are very much in the moment and less big picture. They're just trying to cope with what's happening right in front of them. They're at a loss. They're numb. They're stunned. They're overwhelmed with things like, will I ever see my husband again since he's declining quickly with COVID and I'm not allowed to see him? Can I figure out this Skype Zoom thing so I can at least see my loved one perhaps for the last time? Or will they see me? Or now that my wife is hospitalized with COVID and I'm also positive, am I going to die? Or both of us going to die? And certainly as a nurse, people might think of this nurses, how can I take extra precautions so I don't bring this home to my young children? Because clearly they have more exposure than we do. So it's interesting that I'm seeing that people are in this kind of desperate, confused, baffled, numb mode in the here and now, and seemingly and interestingly don't tend to contemplate on the why so much in the moment, because it's a pandemic and it's very real and raw and here and now. Now they might think about that when they get home, but I actually heard that more before COVID with patients that were sick. Why has this happened? He took very good care of himself and now he's, so I think that's they're not pondering the big picture and the systemic nature of this pandemic. More so is what can I do now to deal with and cope with this situation? But I have to say, Todd, if I do have to answer these questions at other times. And, I always say it's simple when they say, why is God allowing this to happen? Why is this, coming down on us now? I say, we'll never have the answers to these mysteries in this life, but I tell them what I believe and am certain of, that God is in the midst of this, guiding, helping, supporting, leading us to come together, using our gifts and our graces and our talents to serve one another and offer opportunities to help and lean into our faith more. And, I wish, and I would tell them this, I wish I could say something more concrete or prophetic for what's to come, but I'm okay with that. And what I would say to the patient or the family is, I'm here for you here and now. And let's just keep talking about that together.
What does a trust in Jesus mean for us as we deal with this pandemic?
Trust in Jesus, indeed.
Yeah.
I think leaning into our faith and our relationship with Christ is more important than ever now during this and during any type of crisis, be it personal or worldwide, and to help us deal better with less anxiety. And we always are going to have uncertainty. We're always going to have unknown. And I would never, ever claim that God initiated this on us, but I do believe that in uncertain and scary times, we need to trust, that the Holy One is in the midst of it all. And whether you have high or low Christology, we need to remember too that Jesus wept. Jesus wept when he walked this earth, and he cries when we cry. And I think it's trusting not only that triune God that we Christians believe in, but also have hope and trust in humanity that we can come together through this. And I think we're seeing it in a lot of, simple but powerful ways just around our neighborhoods. And we'll always have that human brokenness and selfishness and power and greed, but Jesus is there in the end, and God's love is the one thing that is true and steadfast. And that makes things just a little easier, at least for me.
Tiffanie Lyon, a pastor inside the United Methodist Church and a chaplain, performing pastoral care through glass and Skype sessions. We know you have a lot on your plate. We thank you for carving time out of your day to talk to us. We thank you very much.
Sure thing. My pleasure. Thanks, Todd.
Reverend Tiffanie Lyon, First Slidell and chaplain at Ochsner in New Orleans. Our next guest is Dr. Chip Riggins, member of First UMC in Houma, regional medical director for the Bayou Region. His interview coming up. But first, a word from our sponsor, the United Methodist Foundation of Louisiana. And boy, are they up to something good. They want to help you with your most unique ministry idea. With the quarantine in place and an unknown end date, churches and pastors are all having to rise to the occasion and get creative with ministry. We all know that. For some, it's broadcasting worship services and Bible studies over the internet. All of these unique ideas cost money, and that's where the foundation wants to help. Your foundation has set aside $100,000 to award to churches and ministries within the Louisiana Annual Conference to help fund creative ministry. The idea must support evangelism, mission, and/or outreach during this unprecedented time, and they are encouraging all of us to use our imagination and to use our hearts. Have questions? Want to apply? Just head to their website, umf.org, for more information. More specifically, head to umf.org/unique. Back to our show now. Our next interview is with Dr. Chip Riggins, member of First United Methodist Church in Houma, where he has served as lay leader and, as we mentioned, regional medical director for the Bayou Region of South Central Louisiana. And we wanted to begin our conversation with an update on the numbers, if you will. More specifically, the general feeling out there that we might be heading to the other side of this curve that we have talked about. And I asked Dr. Riggins if we are indeed on the other side of the curve.
I'm optimistic. I think we are seeing signs that our efforts are flattening the epidemiologic curve or the epi curve. We have seen a reduction in the number of new admissions. We're now discharging more patients from our hospitals than we are admitting them, at least in this region of Louisiana. And that's a good sign. Unfortunately, our deaths are not decreasing, and just in the last day or two, our state experienced the worst day in terms of the total number of deaths. So deaths are lagging. That's one reason to be cautious in our optimism. And then, as the governor said yesterday, we're coming upon the sort of incubation period that might tell us how well people maintained social distancing over the Easter weekend. So we have an old adage in public health that as a disease nears eradication, it's more likely that the program and not the disease will be eradicated. And that, I'm afraid, might be at work here if we're not diligent in sustaining these measures.
You have experience in navigating disasters and seeing the medical ramifications during those times, and you have seen a systemic problem with society in general. Can you speak to that for us and what that might mean for our calling as Christians?
Well, that's a great question. I have seen it. I was a part of the National Guard response to New Orleans immediately following Katrina, and I saw the same problems exposed by that disaster. I also watched over the following months and years how New Orleans really was deliberate and thoughtful and approached their recovery from that in many ways. And I think this disaster for the entire state and country, I think it deserves, as much thought and caring and deliberate recovery as we had following Katrina in New Orleans. And I hope that as a Christian community, I think we're looked to be leaders in that. I think we're going to have a huge role to play in the recovery, in the discussions, the dialogues, and the deliberations about how we can not only recover, but recover in a way that makes us a more resilient community to threats like this, and that really makes us less prone to these types of disparities across our population. But we're going to have to get at some very difficult root causes, and I think that really calls for Christian leadership.
And we have a responsibility not only to our neighbors, but to the planet as well. A responsibility to bring the light of Christ into a broken world, and the light of Christ in some ways is better healthcare.
Indeed. Healthcare needs to be protected, and there's a lot of discussion right now about the social contract that we have to take care of our healthcare first responders. We make sure that they have adequate PPE, and to the best that we can, we make sure that scarce resources are allocated in their direction. But at the end of the day, healthcare and we as a community have to become much more aware of the health disparities in our population. I guess much more considerate of the determinants of health that led to the fact that there is more chronic disease in the Black community in Louisiana, that we as a state suffer in general from poor health outcomes, and that those problems and those health disparities have their roots in poverty. They have their roots in hunger. They have their roots in our family units and transportation and housing, homelessness and housing security. So all of those determinants of health, and we as a Christian community are I think very deliberate and cognizant in our missions and ministries to try to be aware of those and to try to be a caring part of the community response to those problems. But I think the challenge now is going to be, how do we move upstream from the things that we do now to try to get at sustainable solutions to food insecurity or housing insecurity or poverty or poor educational attainment? These are the problems that plague us and put people at risk. And then a pandemic or a disaster just really exposes where we've fallen short. A challenge, and in every challenge is a leadership opportunity, I think.
Lots of challenges abound. We often hear the phrase that we should trust in Jesus. especially at a time like this. Trust in Jesus. What do you think that means for us as we deal with a pandemic, and more specifically as we deal with what could be a new normal, to trust in Jesus? As Dr. Riggins reflects on that phrase, what does it mean to you?
Trust is a very, very meaningful word to me, both as a Christian, because I benefit from my faith, the strength that I derive from it, and the relationships that I have because of it. It strengthened me to do this work. So as an individual, that trust in Jesus manifests in my own strength and resilience in very remarkable ways. As a family doctor, trust had a special meaning to me because I always felt that trust defined the extent to which a caring relationship could happen between me and my patients. And so trust, when it exists between a physician and a patient, really leads to such better outcomes at a lower cost, I might add, when trust exists. And in some ways, our basic faith and trust in Jesus allows us and prepares us to be more trusting in our relationships with caregivers and with folks in our communities. And I think as we look forward to how are we going to dialogue and how are we going to respond to this pandemic, trusting each other and trusting across dogmas and across very diverse groups of people, trust is going to be equally as important, just foundational. So I really think as Christians that relying on the trust and the faith and the strength that our belief brings us allows us to build relationships based on trust and faith. And I think that's going to go a long way to really getting at some of our community's problems as we recover from this pandemic.
Dr. Chip Riggins, member of Houma United Methodist Church, Regional Medical Director for the 7-parish area known as the Bayou Region. We know you are a very busy man, and we thank you for your time, Dr. Riggins.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure, Todd.
Dr. Chip Riggins, Reverend Tiffanie Lyon, we thank them both for their time today here on the Louisiana Now podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, we encourage you to share it with someone you know. Subscribe to the show so you won't miss an episode. And if you are so inclined, leave us a review. We'd also love to hear from you, as we're always looking for great ideas for episodes here on the Louisiana Now podcast. If you have an idea, drop us a line. The email is podcast@la-umc.org. For Mary Burley, our show producer, the United Methodist Foundation, our sponsor, I'm your host, Todd Rossnagel. Until next time, may the grace of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you today, tomorrow, and the tomorrow after that. Thanks for joining us, everyone.